Good morning, guys. Welcome back to another episode of the Eco Fight podcast. Today, we have a special guest, which I'm really excited to have involved. And she is actually one of our first ambassadors for the Eco Fight that is going to be registered. So it's really excited to have you on this morning, Katarina. And I wanted to welcome you to the podcast.
Hi, good morning. Good morning.
Awesome. Now, Katarina is based in Texas, United States, and is an activist for the environment, which is why she's on this podcast in simple terms. But originally, where were you from? It's Lithuania?
Yes, Lithuania.
Yeah. Tell me a bit about that journey.
Well, whenever I was about 10 years old, my dad had actually won a green card in a lottery, and that's how we ended up coming over here to the United States. Um, I do miss having four seasons. We don't really have that here in Texas. It's kind of either just super hot or rainy. You only have two
Yeah.
seasons here. That's about it. A lot of floods as of lately. But it was a little bit of adjustment. And coming from Europe over here, there's such a big difference between the recycling industry. A lot of people recycle much more on that side of the world than they do here. So it's
Mm.
definitely something that had caught my attention whenever I did come over here, because we have different colored trash cans in Europe for specific materials, which here a lot of the times you have to pay to be able to recycle something. It's
Yeah.
quite mind blown in comparison between the two.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I think I'm not actually too familiar with how it happens in the US. I know here in Australia we have a yellow, green, a bin, a red bin, a green bin, and everything's for something else. And so when it all gets taken away, I guess we all then think it gets recycled and stuff like that. But it's interesting to see that the United States has a completely different system. But one thing I wanted to ask, what inspires what inspires you to do what you do today?
Well, it has to be my dad. Growing up, my dad, he was a biologist and a scientist. So growing up, he had introduced me to the world of nature in general. And we used to do little things like bring animals home from the wild, the ones that you were allowed to touch,
Mm,
that wouldn't be abandoned by their actual mothers and whatnot in the wild. And he would let me keep him for about 12 to 24 hours. And then we would have to bring him back to exact spot in the woods. And he would just teach me how to really pay attention to nature and, what, um, how in general, how beautiful it is and what it does for us. And, how we should preserve stuff like that. It was just really nice to have been opened up to that kind of world, because we would spend hours and hours out in nature just looking at insects and looking at trees and looking at butterflies and looking at different animals and just doing all these different hikes with a purpose. And it made me fall in love with nature so much that this is an experience that I would like to pass down to my children and their children when all of them become alive. It's one of those
yeah.
things where you just want every generation to enjoy the beauty in this world. And I'm afraid with the way we're going as humanity, it's those days they seem to be going away further and further from following generations to be able to enjoy beautiful nature and beautiful fresh air.
Yeah, awesome. And Katarina, I think I'm going to go off script real quick, but you have a fairly substantial following on Instagram, and I know that you have an extreme passion for the environment. But can you tell me what it is that you do at the moment, and what it is that you want to do in the future, to kind of follow your passions?
Well, I would actually like to start something here in Texas that has to do with cleaning up either the trash or the plastic, because I've noticed there's a fairly high amount of trash all over the place that is left behind,
Mm,
either on beaches or in the woods. And it's very disappointing because the animals end up hurting themselves through that trash. And, there was actually this video that surfaced up, and everybody can look it up. This happened in Denver and last year, a video of an elk who had a tire wrapped around his neck. he had ginormous
Mm.
antlers, and it's just so sad because you have to understand that this poor animal at a certain point have got to have put his head through this tire, and he grew up and the tire stayed around his neck. Tires are quite heavy. Like, that's very, very sad that
Mm.
an animal has to go through that. But granted, they caught him and got rid of the tire. But that's a very sad thing that happens. So through my social media, I would like to educate people and get their attention to things that perhaps maybe it's not that they don't matter to these people, but perhaps it's just something that they're unaware of. I think
Yeah.
educating people on things that happen daily, things that they can change in their own daily routine that can benefit the whole entire world. I mean, it's just, little step at a time. I would like to make a
Yeah.
difference. And I think if multiple people would do the same, then we would have a brighter future ahead of us.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. That's awesome. And anyone that is kind of in a position at the moment where they don't know how to get started with maybe not starting an organization, but just getting a little bit more involved. They want to start to build a social media. What's some advice you'd have for people like that?
Well, since I do live in the United States, the number one thing I would like to advise people to do is to start recycling. And the thing is that recycling is not mandatory here. But through recycling, for example, that plastic, we throw away. I did this little test about 8 years ago with all the trash that my household consumed. I started. This is um, before any kind of recycling would stop by the neighborhood to pick up recycling. We would actually have to travel about 15 miles to go somewhere to recycle. So we would just collect all the stuff. And I wanted to see, we would usually drop it off every week, but I wanted to see in a month what it would look like, if we collected
Mm.
all the plastics and everything. And it was really mind blowing because I had these 15 sacks of what you usually contains like food for horses. They're quite big sacks. They're like half the size of my body. I had 15 of them filled up with plastic. Now, plastic doesn't just degrade as easy as paper would or food items. So to think that it's just my household, you
Mm.
know, it was three people in a house who had produced this much trash, and we're fairly, we pay attention to what we consume and how much of what we consume. It's really mind blowing to know that we had this much trash, as in plastic,
Yeah.
that was just going to go into trash. If my house is like that and you just take 10 houses down the block, it blows my mind. So the one thing
Yeah.
I would like for people to start kind of paying attention to, I think it starts with just the first thing of paying attention to how much you consume of things in plastic and what you could do with that plastic. Another thing that I would advise is, we don't really know exactly how plastic gets recycled over here in the United States. Sometimes it gets taken. We really don't know because all of that costs money, and there's not a lot of information out there to see what actually happens. But I do know that if it has to be carried away by sea, by the ocean, a lot of it can fly out and go and pollute the ocean.
Mm.
Now, the thing with that, I always like let everybody know about the bags that the potatoes will come in, for example. It's a very tight net. And if people do not cut that up into pieces, you basically just have a bag that is impossible to rip open. And things like that, even when you do recycle and you throw that in a recycling bin, those things should be cut up. They should be cut
Mm.
up so just in case it does make its way to nature, animals are not going to be trapped in it, as
Yeah.
well as I know that recycling places over here, they get very frustrated with people in general because people are requested to wash their recycling items. And I feel like if everybody just played their part and, if they ate something out of plastic and just rinsed it off of water and put it in a recycling bin, it would make everybody's life easier. And then you would have more recycling jobs because people wouldn't be so hateful towards how people do recycle.
Mm.
Because I have seen people put out things in recycling that does not belong in recycling. And again, this goes back more and more into educating people in this whole process of recycling and what they can
Yeah.
do. But that would be a really good start for anybody, is to just, think about how they consume things and how much of that they consume. Perhaps maybe not use items that are made out of plastic. Have continuous reusable items. Like, for example, like, I'm in love with the straws that we have at our house. They're
Yeah.
metal. They're very convenient to me, and it's like, we don't, it's less trash that we have. Or we like to use a lot of glass containers for things. Little things like that can make a really big difference overall.
Yeah. Awesome. It's so interesting to hear that, because like it's such a when as an organization we get asked all the time, well, what's the best way to combat this? And everyone has a different opinion. Do you go after the government and get them to create laws about it? Do you get the organizations to stop manufacturing it? Or do you just get people to start disposing it and educate them how to properly recycle? But only 9% of plastic in the US actually gets recycled, and has only ever been. So any
That
piece of
breaks my
plastic that's
heart.
ever been manufactured, only 9% of it's actually ever done anything. The rest of it's in either landfill or created pollution in the environment. So it's a really sad thing to see. But one thing that we're trying to work on is saying, well, how can we stop manufacturers from just saying, well, let's just produce another type of product? 500 million straws get used in the US alone every single day. 500 million,
You
which
can
is,
build a raft from that many straws.
yeah. And so we had a quiz on our Instagram yesterday, and that was one of the most the question that almost everyone got wrong, is that 500 million straws get used daily. So you think about the amount of output. Let's say that only 10% of them don't get properly disposed of, and 1% of them go into the environment. So it's on a daily basis, you've got hundreds of thousands of straws getting put into the environment, and we can see the impact of that. So it's a very hard thing to say, let's educate everyone, but it's like, we've got to educate the people that can create laws to just completely stop that manufacturing process. So it is a hard thing to kind of really question. But another thing I wanted to kind of understand, I know pollution, which I don't understand this, but pollution doesn't actually get, or plastic pollution doesn't get put onto a climate change award. So climate change is basically things that are affecting temperatures and stuff like that in the environment, but it doesn't actually get fall into plastic pollution. But what are your thoughts on climate change, I guess I should ask?
Well, when it comes down to climate change, it's a very tricky question, and it's a very fine line between people's opinions about it, because I feel like a lot of people break down into two categories. They either think that climate change is specifically only caused by the planet, and there's people who think that climate change is caused only by people. When I believe
Mm,
in reality, it's both worlds, that collide together, because no matter what, everything in our universe it keeps moving forward. Time does not
mm,
stop. It keeps going forward, and everything that has to grow up, it grows up and then, leaves this world and so forth. And so when we look at our Earth, no matter what, the Earth has to go through changes, and climate is going to come with it, because you cannot have a change and, there's a cause and effect to this whole climate change. So
mm.
that's one thing for it. But people, we absolutely play a big role in speeding up the process of climate change. Climate
Yeah.
change will happen regardless of whether we are here or we are not, but we play a big part in speeding it up. Agriculture, the animals that we consume plays a huge part in it. The way we dispose of trash, the way we dispose of chemicals, and just daily habits that people do, that people have, all of that plays a big, significant role in climate change. And I feel like
Mm,
if people were more cautious of what they do, then perhaps we could slow down uh, the whole climate change. We could slow it down. We cannot stop it. It's inevitable. We cannot do anything about it,
mm.
but we definitely can slow it down and make it easier on Mother Earth to, go through and do what she needs to do. you know.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing because you mentioned climate change being natural climate change and I guess man-made or human-made climate change. And yes, the climate changes naturally, but everything that happens in the climate is an ebb and flow. So everything balances out, right? One of the big things is that we're accelerating climate change through the amount of emissions that we create. And in doing that, we see things like the ice caps melting at a faster rate. Now, I don't know the exact metric on this, but I was watching the documentary the other day that mentioned that it's over some million tons of ice that melts every single day. And now,
Absolutely.
when you look at that on a perspective, the way that the ice poles work is that they store large amounts of methane deep within the ice, and so when that starts to melt, we start to increase the methane, which is when you have governments and stuff that talk about climate change isn't real, they're talking about the fact that these ice caps melting are releasing more methane than what we as humans do on a daily basis. But the reason that they're melting at a faster rate is because of us. So it's a real interest thing that I'm in, is how can we start to capture all of the greenhouse gases and start to emit them back down. And I guess you can't put them anywhere apart from bury them, which is I'm not too familiar on, but definitely it's something to understand that climate change is real, and we have, as a human race, we have accelerated it. Um, and the countries that are I guess not to put the United States down, but the United States is 5% more than China in using the most amount of energy. And China is one of the leading edge countries now for creating solutions to less emissions. So although they still have a very bad plastic pollution creation problem, they
Yeah.
are creating far less emissions than any other country in the world, which, well, not any other country, but they've got the most advancements in it, which is really cool to see. Katarina, I really wanted to understand, you mentioned your dad before, but I want to understand what inspired you to want to make a change and actually invest some time in your life in this, because I know personally for me, growing up, I grew up on a farm, I grew up around nature, I grew up around everything, and as I started to grow up, I was always fascinated about education and learning more about how things work. I'm a really mechanical person where I'm like, I can't accept not understanding how it works. And then when it comes to science and knowing how wind works and how temperature change and stuff works, it was like I just got to understand it. And then when I understood the impact we were having, and the fact that my kids will be around to see the future, but maybe their grandkids won't be, and that's disheartening to me. It hurts, right? And so that's
Absolutely.
kind of what inspires me. And then when I see, and I go to the beach and I see plastic on the side and I see animals suffering, I go, I've got to do something about it. And I'm extremely business minded. So for me, I was always going to get into business, but I realized that I could use my skills in business to actually create change in the world. So that's kind of what inspired me. But I'd love to hear what you think.
Um, I'm definitely, right there, right side by side with that. I grew up having, I was just out in nature all the time, enjoying my time there. And I'm in love with animals and in love with all nature around me, because I honestly go into a depression if I'm not out in nature at least once a week. I think it's so
Mm,
necessary for every human being to really go outside and enjoy the fresh air and just look at all the beautiful greenery that they may have around them, or whatever terrain they have. It's extremely healthy for us. Now, we kind of live in a vicious cycle currently
mm,
where people are getting sicker, and we're consuming a lot more animals, and it's just a vicious cycle between the pain of animals and the pain of the environment along with people. And to me, it's inspiring to change something in the environmental movement. That's what really inspires me, is the fact
mm,
that by fixing one issue, we could kind of start having a chain reaction between human life and animal life and the whole environment all together.
yeah.
And this way, moving forward, children and great children and great 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 children would be able to still enjoy Earth, because the way it's looking right now, we just have so much cement going up and so many buildings and so much land is being
Mm,
taken away. But with the amount of land that's being taken away, we're having more natural disasters. But the thing with natural disasters is it's not even that they're natural disasters, we play a big part in it. I would like to bring as an example Yalta, which is a place in Ukraine, which was swished away by rivers recently, and it was happened about a month ago.
mm,
And the reason for that was that, although the government isn't saying much about it, but the environmental science states that it is the cause of deforestation. And we just had a few days ago, China. It's so many rivers are just overflown, and it's not so much that it's only the rain amount that's hitting all these countries. It's the
mm,
fact that we do not have enough of trees standing in the ground to sustain the earth, because what happens is when we do not have those deeply rooted roots, uh, earth becomes very, everything is just mud, it turns to mud, and you have mudslides,
mm,
and you have the land and soil just separates and it just goes in every direction, which is harmful for nature, it's harmful for people, it's harmful for cities, and it's like things like that, little things like that, that the government could possibly be aware of. I'm sure they're aware of it,
mm.
but it's the fact that the government could prevent so much more further spending by reducing the amount of this deforestation that's happening. And I just feel like there
Yeah.
has to be a way that everything can be figured out, um, where everything can kind of go as a puzzle, rather than demolish one area, move on to the next area, and so forth, because there's too much suffering between everybody. Honestly,
Mm,
we are very fortunate in America to live in a country that is, we have water, we have clean water, even though aquifers are already running low, which indicates that in some places in America are already not getting enough of clean water. Sometimes they have to cut back and turn off the water supply and so forth. And then you have, third world countries that are, poor children cannot drink clean water. And that to me is heartbreaking. It is
mm,
heartbreaking to know that there are children out there in the world that cannot consume clean water, that they have to depend on rainwater, which is, when you think about it, rainwater is not so clean either, because it's all the chemicals that are polluting the air just coming right back down, and none of that
yeah.
is healthy for these children. This following generation is growing up with so many diseases and sicknesses and cancer and so forth. It's very, very sad. The future for these children should be better than what it is now, and I feel like it
Yeah.
is, we as adults should be able to contribute to this, so these poor kids in the future generation can enjoy nature, they can enjoy a simple healthy life. I feel like it is it's our right as a human on this planet to
Mm,
be able to live a healthy, fulfilled life, simply by what we
mm.
have around us. And right now, not everybody can do that, and it's very heartbreaking.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting though, like, because everything comes with an ebb and flow, right? So um if you cut back one thing, it's gonna negatively affect another. So to cut back the manufacturing of products, well, if we cut back the manufacturing of some sort of product, that's going to have a negative effect of someone in the world, which even if it's creating jobs, right? And so it's such an interesting thing, like stopping the cutting down of trees. We need to stop cutting down trees in the Amazon, but we can start to replant fast growing trees. And I think the interesting study is that 11% of the United States agriculture or farming land is used for growing crops, and the other like 90 something percent is for having cows and livestock. But then when you look at it,
Like,
almost, yeah, and almost 60% of the plants that get grown in the US go straight towards feeding the livestock. So you say what we actually consume as a rate, or what the Americans consume as vegetables and things that we grow from the ground, um, it only takes up about 6% of the land mass in the United States. So if you were to turn that entire 100% of your agriculture or farming land into what would be just plants, you would have an entirely different outlook on the amount of food that you could produce for the world. And this goes for everyone in the world, right? If we were to give clean water or access to clean water to a lot of places in Africa and stuff like that, you would be able to start to see them increase their poverty levels because they can start to have more farming opportunities. They can start to create more jobs, and it creates an entire different. Even just running water creates electricity to towns that don't have it. And
Yeah.
so it's such an interesting thing to look into, but it's one of those mind-boggling things where when you start to think about it, you get no answers. It just gets more confusing, right? So
It does, but I I feel like there just has to be an answer to those kind of things. You know, we
mm,
have to be able to do something because you're absolutely right. The agriculture here, it blows me away. I don't eat any land animals, and although I am a pescatarian, I have completely, I'm cutting down more and more of seafood that I eat per month to where it's just mostly vegetables for me and
mm,
grains and things like that because it scares me what's happening to the ocean, and it is awful what had happened, what is going on currently, here with agriculture in America, because we cut down a lot of land and we grow crops on it to give that crop specifically only to cows, which pollute with methane the air. And then, we take away all the nutrients from this land. And then once the nutrients are gone, the soil is no longer viable for us. And so
mm,
then it's just an empty field that we do not do anything with. And then we
mm,
cut down more trees to either build houses or for agriculture. And at the same time, this is going back to cows, and we're feeding clean water to cows, which
mm,
some people do not have enough of clean water in the United States to drink right now. But somehow we're still giving away all of this clean, fresh water to cows. So it's like, it's just a negative on top of a negative on top of a negative for a single cow. You can save as much water as you want in your house by limiting your showers, by limiting your baths, but not eating meats, not eating red meat a day is like not showering for a whole entire month.
mm,
It's really mind blown to know these kind of comparisons,
yeah.
and I
Well,
just wish.
just to put in there, it's just so people have some context. For 1 pound of meat from a cow, it takes 16 gallons of water to create that 1 pound of meat. So when you put that in perspective, if you're not to eat meat for a day and you averagely eat a pound or two by yourself, which I used to when I ate meat, I would have probably about a kilo of steak or beef a day.
Mhm.
And so when you look at that, 16 to 30 gallons of water has not then been used. It's far less to create plants than it is to
Yeah,
obviously grow meat.
it's
Yeah.
crazy because and then we're stuck with these landfills that is just this empty piece of land that we're not doing anything on, and I just can't stop but wonder, why not have a kind of like um, a process of where if we have done this, then why not build on this? And this is where we can start building some kind of neighborhoods or some kind of uh, other thing, that whatever we need to build as countries, little metropolitan areas and so forth. It just, by
Mm,
the end of it, it just ends up being to where we don't have land left, we don't have trees on there, and then we're cutting out more trees and more land for buildings, and for cows. Like it's very depressing. There
mm,
should be a smarter system in place um, to fix all of this. It's going to take a
yeah.
lot of work, and it's going to take the government and people. The government's not going to do this because they care. There's a lot of money that's involved. It's a very, very scary situation with all of that, and
Mm,
there's a lot of money involved, and it's something that's, it's not that easy to deal with in general. It's not that easy to digest. But there are so many people in the world, and there are so many people in the United States, and if people were to stand up And if they were to refuse to whatever service, for
Mm,
example, like if, let's bring up those straws again. If people were just all going to buy a straw that's made out of metal and they just kept it in the car and then they just kept some at home and then that's it, we could completely get rid of straws. I mean, it's going
mm,
to start with humans. And if we were to get rid of them, if there's no supply and demand, then they're not going to produce straws anymore. And I
mm,
feel like it's a step by step that can be taken. For example, in stores over here, what I see the most plastic, or what I see my trash can get filled up with, the type of plastic, it's always the plastic that has either vegetables in it or berries or some kind of
mm,
fruits. There's so much plastic when it comes down to that. Now, plastic is a bit toxic, so this goes back into the little tiny particles that we are consuming as human beings. And on top of that, not only it's a negative thing for us, but it's also a negative thing for nature. And at the end of the day, why can't we all just use recycled cardboard instead of that
mm.
plastic? Like, why can't the berries be in it? It's just little things that we could adjust that would make a huge difference. Like over
Yeah.
here, for example, I was very shocked when we first moved here. So back home in Lithuania, you do not get free bags for your groceries. You either bring your
Mm,
own bag or you have to pay money to get a bag. And
mm,
over here, it's like they will double bag it for you, triple bag it. They just give you those bags left and right, left and right. It's just
mm,
it's just a huge amount of bags that is going back into trash. It's going back into landfills. It's floating around
mm,
in water. You find it in the woods. You find it on the highway. You find it everywhere. It's
mm.
it's mind blowing, and it's little things like that. You start making people pay for their bags, they're not going to be very careless with them because
Yeah.
they pay their own money for it. And I
Yeah.
feel like sometimes rules like that are really beneficial to have. I believe California actually did something like that where they had completely got rid of those kind of bags, or they're in the movement to get rid of them, and I know they had implemented some rules over it, so that's good. But California is, I think, one of those states that actually moves forward a lot with a lot of environmental
Mm,
tactics,
yeah.
but not
I
tactics,
mean,
we need more of that here.
I mean, a big tick for Australia. We here in Australia, we made it, or the government made it a rule that no supermarkets could use single-use plastic
Yeah,
bags, and that was good. And now you had to purchase, and some places still have plastic. They claim it as a biodegradable, but the way biodegradable plastics work is there's a grade of degradability, and so as long as they meet a certain grade, then they're allowed to call it biodegradable. But realistically, what it could be and what they should change is there's about 10 to 15 steps of what level of biodegradable it is. And so a lot of the plastic that you find, if you actually go and research how biodegradable it is, it's on one of the lowest ranks, which is almost just as bad as normal plastic. But on that, Sweden is one of the first countries to completely ban plastic entirely from supermarkets, single-use cutlery, and it didn't really affect any sort of organizations because they all went, okay, we'll stop manufacturing plastic and we'll start manufacturing cardboard and bamboo and metal, and it's worked perfectly, and everyone agreed to it. And I think Australia's on that. As of next month, no restaurants are allowed to give you single-use cutlery, which is fantastic. But not yet has everyone filtered across to understand that you can use metal, bamboo, and it doesn't just have to be paper,
absolutely,
because a lot of people
absolutely.
think that
Steps to
the
it.
only alternative to straws is paper, and I'm like, well, no, there's plenty of alternatives, right? So I think it's a lack of education still. But you mentioned something before about getting rules changed, and if we can get enough people to all say we want our strawberries in a cardboard box, or we want our strawberries in a bamboo container or like a bamboo bag or something like that, then you can start, the government will start to listen and organizations will listen because people will refuse to buy. And so until we can gather enough people all combating and say, we don't want to buy our strawberries in a plastic punnet or a container, then we're going to continue to have these issues, I guess. So, yeah.
Yeah, another thing that just popped up in my head, I feel like it's almost kind of like unfair that, for example, we have this store here. It's called Whole Foods,
Mm,
and it's in the name. It's Whole Foods,
yeah.
and what it is in there. I hardly ever see any plastic. It's a lot of the time it's the
Mm,
cardboard and so forth. But the thing is that it's a very expensive it's a fairly expensive store.
yeah.
It's not something that average people can just go and shop at all the time. Like I got some, I got 4 peaches from there, a couple of weeks ago, and these are like organic peaches, and I paid about $8 for them. That's quite pricey. That's
Yeah.
very, very expensive. And again, I feel like it's almost like it's our right as being taken away as human beings to be healthy
Mm,
and to get better things in life, simply because companies make things cheaper. And it's going back to this, having strawberries in a little crate that's made out of cardboard or having it in plastic. I can't see I can't even imagine what it would be like for a store like Walmart, which is I don't know if you've ever heard that store, but it's a huge
yeah. Yeah.
supermarket here, and a lot of people over here, they'll shop there, but everything contains plastic there. And I feel like
Mm,
if we could, instead of focusing so much on people that are already educated and people that are already, educated in this specific sphere, instead of focusing on all the high end people who can afford the more expensive things and so forth,
mm,
I feel like we need to bring our um, point and view back to people that shop daily at stores like Walmart. It's those
mm,
kinds of stores that have a extremely, extremely high amount of customers. That's where we need to see that change. And I feel like if we see that change with these bigger, bigger names, then we could definitely make you know, the world go round, so to say.
yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
I got a question for you. In your local area, what are some of the what are the most environmental issues that you're seeing?
well, specifically in mine, I mean, there's a lot of trash all over the place, and
Mm,
the trash is either from whenever people pick up trash, like the trash man.
mm,
A lot of it really comes from not caring about it, I suppose, because there would be
mm,
stuff left behind and it will fly all over the neighborhoods, or people they just throw it out their window as they drive. I've seen that multiple
mm,
times. That actually happens, that they'll just throw things out. Um, so there's a lot of just trash in local areas that you can see, that you will be on the grass, on the ground, and so forth. um, when it comes down to, if we look at that, I would say that's what's happening in my area, but there's a place about 4 hours away from me. It's called Corpus Christi, and Corpus Christi is, they have a lot of production, they have a lot of refineries producing plastic, which pollutes the
mm,
air. And it's terrifying to know, and I don't know why people don't really address this as much as they should, because these
mm,
uh, big refineries that produce plastic, they're actually producing plastic that's water bottle plastic.
mhm,
And a lot of people are getting really, really sick in those neighborhoods. And we're talking about getting sick with cancer. And it's not only older people, they're seeing it now in kids. And those numbers are going up and up. But at the same time, those children and those families are stuck living there because they had bought a house there. And, nobody's
mm,
listening to them. Nobody really cares. And it's by that demographic, these people are just stuck in the position that they're at, getting sicker and sicker while we're polluting the air with all of that plastic. It's a
yeah.
very, very depressing thing to think about. And I imagine a lot of people don't want to think about that. It's
Mm,
easier to, have a naive outlook on life. But if we don't start addressing those kind of issues, then, more people are going to suffer. I think as humans, we need to start caring about all the people around us, not just ourselves and our families and somebody that we know, because a lot of people won't really care enough to address an issue unless they have been affected by that issue.
Mm,
And I wish that humans in today's world would just kind of, start caring for that neighbor that they don't know, not to
mm,
mow the lawn at like 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, just like little
yeah.
habits. It's like we need to, as a community, care for one another. And if we care for one another as a community, then we can grow from that and make a big change in the world where
Mm,
it's not going to matter if you're making hundreds of thousands of dollars every single year, or you're in the low bracket of 20s or 30,000 a year. Then everybody's health is important. Everybody should stand on the same line. There should never
mm,
be such thing as the rich can have a better life, and because you will never see any oil refineries next to rich houses next to a very
mm,
suburban neighborhood. You're never going to see that. And it's just not fair, because those are the people who can afford all those medical bills here in America, versus the poor people who cannot, they're stuck next to a cancer causing uh, refinery. And then at the same time, they can't even escape it because this is all that they have, and then they
mm.
don't have enough of money to go and get the right treatment or go and get the clean food that they deserve. It's just kind of like a human right being taken away little by little. And
Mm.
it causes my heart to hurt.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where if it's out of sight, it's out of mind, right? If people can't
Yeah.
see the problem, then they don't really care. And so that's another thing. It's great with social media. Like we can show. I know we do it a lot on our social media. We get told all the time that we need to start posting more positive stuff. And I'm like, well, once the planet stops being negative, then I'll start posting positive stuff. But we
Uh,
post stuff all around the world of just horrible, like plastic in these areas, riverways being filled with pollution, and it just shows people what's happening, I guess. But I wanted to ask if people wanted to reach out to you and have a chat privately with you. What are your social medias? How can they do it?
they can reach out to me through my Instagram, and it's at Kaya Lova. They can reach out to me through TikTok as well. It's also Kaya Lova on there
Yeah.
as well. I'd be more than happy to answer any of their questions, or just to kind of help them get started with changing their ways and maybe changing the people in their household ways. And it's little by little baby steps, and we can make a big change in the world, as long as
Mm,
the whole community comes together. Like, it always blows my mind to think like there's so many people in the world. I mean,
mm,
it's so crazy of how many people we have in the world. Instead of, how people are constantly saying that, oh, we're very overpopulated and so forth, and it's our fault that we just have too many people in the world. Well, hold on now.
yeah.
Like, yes, we have a lot of people. We're at this point, but instead of having conversations about, not having, not producing any more kids, or uh, these mean jokes where people will say something like, oh, we should just, to some people, I'm like, oh my gosh, no. Instead, we need to change our ways and become a community where we care
Mm,
for one another and where we can actually make a change, because by altering what we do daily, we will be able to sustain our food source and so forth. We'll be able to sustain everything as long as we take the right steps towards that. We don't
mm,
have to not give birth to children anymore, or whatever it may be. We just need to change our ways, our own personal ways, and just little by little, we'll be able to come to a better future for everybody, where we don't have
mm,
to say no to certain people and only yes to certain others. We should be able to do everything as a community together, as one unity. We would be so
mm,
much stronger. Like, so many voices, if so many voices spoke up, the world would have to change, all
mm,
together. I always think, like, my ideal thing, I always think how we have a big issue with the ocean and how the coral is being wiped out, and we get like 50-80% of oxygen from the ocean.
mm,
If we wipe out all the fish in the ocean, we're going to have a more intense climate change, because the fish,
mhm,
they filter out as they move. It's everything has its own beautiful purpose in this world. And as
Mm.
the fish is moving left to right and they're swimming around, they're changing the currents in the water, they're altering the temperature, because it's kind of like stirring a pot, and they're cooling down the water. That's actually a thing that fish do.
Mm.
If we're fishing it out, then the water is just it's going to stay still. The less fish, the more, it's not going to have the proper chemical exchange in the water. Then the coral, that's dying off, that's producing a lot of oxygen. All those little things, if we don't have that, then it's terrifying. And I always think, wow, if we could, as the whole entire world would just stop eating seafood for 5 years, we would completely regenerate our whole entire ecosystem in the ocean.
Hmm.
All it would take is just like 5 years. It's just, I mean, it kind of blows my mind that we could make such a huge difference in the world. I mean, of course,
Mm.
I'm sure if somebody hears me, they're going to be like, oh my gosh, she's so crazy. And what do you mean? Stop eating seafood for 5 years? But when we look at it, globally, and if you're going to look at it past yourself and your own needs, if you're going to look at your future children and your future grandchildren, that would be a huge thing that we all would benefit from in the long run, because I think that's honestly the main point of why we suffer nowadays, is because people are stuck in thinking in the now for themselves
Mm.
rather than what cause and effect they apply to this world and how long that's going to last. I
Yeah.
think that's really something. It's that kind of way of thinking that if we could change that, then so many positive things could come out from it.
Yeah. There's so much to it that it's kind of on a day-to-day basis. We're never really going to fully be able to change it, but over a generation of a lifetime, I'm sure we're going to be able to make some massive impacts. So that's
I
really what
hope
I'm
so.
trying to set out to do, and I know that you're the same. So I want to thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today, and I hope the viewers and listeners got something from it. I know that it's gone for about 45 minutes. I'm going to check. Yeah, 45 minutes on the dot. So we'll end this one today, and I'm sure we're going to have you back on in the near future. And I'm going to add your Instagram down in the bios below, so people go and check out the Instagram and TikTok, and reach out to her if you ever want to have a conversation and ask some questions, because I'm sure she'll be able to help. And I'm sure, and I'm still trying to get Katarina involved in it, but doing regular cleanups in Texas. So if you are in Texas or in where she is, send her a message, and I'm sure she's going to be able to, in the next few months, be able to do some, invite you to some cleanup events, which will be really cool. But I want to thank you so much for joining me on the
Thank
podcast
you
today,
so
Katarina.
much. Thank you for having me. Thank
No, that's okay.
you.
Awesome, guys. We'll see you next week on the podcast where we have another amazing guest joining us.